Sorry, the speaker could go in the. There's not one.
Let me know when you're ready. All right. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the December 13th, 2021 regular Board of Education meeting. Every school, I'll start by reciting our vision statement. Every school will be a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate from high school, college, career, and community ready. And recognition of the MMSC's nursing and nursing assistants. And then Barb, I have public content.
Dr. Jenkins will introduce.
Dr. Jenkins.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chair Moulton. This evening, we want to take time out to just show our gratitude and appreciation to our school nurses and nurses assistants who continue to support our students, staff, and our families. They've truly been amazing. Our health office staff have been working relentless hours just to ensure that everyone is safe in our schools. We can truly say that we're proud of our entire team, the way that you've been working over this year. They have been leading with humanity and integrity. And I think as we look at our partnership as a part of ABC Collaborative with Duke University and the University of Wisconsin, we are leading the way in the nation with the things that we're doing. And that's only because of the leadership of our nursing staff and our whole health office. So to you, from us, all of us, thank you. And we hope that you enjoyed the nice gift that we brought out this past week. Thank you.
So there's a video, and I'm gonna try to start that.
As the video is coming up, you're going to see some amazing people here. So to all of you, if you know a nurse, say thank you to them this week.
was really heartwarming. Thank you so much for bringing that to the board, Dr. Jenkins, and I want to thank my fellow board members for being available to drop off gifts to our nurses last week. I think that there's not enough, we cannot say thank you enough to our nurses, but I think we're sure going to try.
Chair Mulder,
Yes.
may I also take this opportunity to say thank you to Karen Kepler, who is a person behind the scenes on many things. And she too just took a lead with our nurses, along with all of the other people who took out our baskets. I want to say thank you too for just taking our time to recognize our nurses, but thank you to Karen Kepler. She led the way.
I second that. Thank you. I think it's nice to work with people who have their heart in the right place, and Karen tends to. All right, we're gonna move forward with public comment, and Barb, do you have the registration for comment?
I do. Shadira, we're ready for your public comment. Just turn on your camera and your mic and we're ready to go. Hello, Shadira, thank you. You may begin.
Am I really first?
You are.
Good night, everybody. How are you? So I have a bunch of hats that I wear in our community, mom, neighbor, and so I'm calling in support of our students at East High School particularly. Concerned about their safety and their food needs. And so I just really feel it's important to try to explore as many solutions as possible. So I really want to give my sincerest, heartfelt thanks to our community members, our moms who've been showing up, Reverend Hart. There's just so many people who have been stepping up, right? Facilitating meetings, trying to, problem solve. And so what's happening has been really beautiful. And I'm really glad that people have been as supportive as they have. But I do have a concern about interim Principal Smith. Really just, I understand that she is in a really very difficult place. So I really want to say that I appreciate the hard work and dedication that she's putting in. And I really also would like her to make the change of having two separate lunches. It's what we had for 3 decades when Milton McPike was principal there. There's a reason there's that many students. There has to be multiple lunches. One lunch does not work. And so I'm going to let other people that I concede the rest of my time. Thank you so much. I love you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is,
That was our only speaker.
that was our only speaker?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Into tonight.
So I do want to also mention, I will take a little more time, that people were having a hard time connecting. They were having a hard time signing up. So I don't know if parents are still on the call that were not able to, so if there's a way for people to show their hands if they were wanting to speak, and you maybe call on them that way, because I know there were at least, 4 parents and community members who were planning on speaking that were unable to register. So I don't know how it's possible to address that. Thank you.
So, she let me know that she was having trouble signing up, and the only reason she was is because she was trying before the portal was open. Portal doesn't open until half an hour before the meeting begins. Sometimes people don't know that we start this meeting at 6 rather than 5. That's probably 98% of what the problem is. But if there are other people who are waiting to speak, I would not know that unless they emailed me or called me, and all of those numbers and all of that stuff is on the website or wherever you're looking.
That's exactly the problem. Everyone thought the meeting begun at 5 as opposed to 6.
Okay, so there are many other opportunities. Perfectly willing to open this up again.
Thank you. I'm just persistent. So thank you.
3 appearances to help us. I appreciate that you released your time and then reclaimed your time in real time. So thank you for joining us, and I apologize for any difficulty folks had registering to speak this evening. All right. I motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the regular board meeting dated May 24th, 2021.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Nama, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor? Motion carries 7-0. News from around the district. These are the board president's announcements. New Year celebration, let students share traditions in states only Hmong bilingual program, in the state's only Hmong bilingual program. Students in Wisconsin's only Hmong bilingual program celebrated their culture and a chance to educate others at Lakeview Elementary School. Lakeview put on a Hmong New Year celebration, which was a chance for the bilingual students to wear their colorful traditional dress. School staff designed a way for all students to feel a part of the celebration through an art and crafts activity where they could make money bells and money bags an essential part of traditional Hmong outfit. The board recognizes and appreciates Lakeview Elementary School's passion and commitment to promote cultural awareness and celebrate our Hmong students and families during Hmong New Year. Successful YouTube videographer passion at Memorial High School. Memorial High School alumni. Listening very slowly, you all. Tree Che Nhaotai, a successful YouTuber with more than 261,000 subscribers, blogger, podcaster, author, devotes her work to sharing personal development and productivity tips. Ratrice grew her passion for videography during high school video and photo classes taught by Memorial Art Department Chair Joe Frontier. As the editor of the Sword and Shield Students newspaper, the board recognizes both Memorial Art Department Chair Joe Frontier and Ratrice for her commitment to bringing people together with her YouTube channel that promotes productivity, positivity, while serving as an example for young students to follow. Superintendent's announcements. Dr. Jenkins.
Yes, thank you for that too. I was celebrating among families New Year, all of our New Year, and that was a great success at Lakeview Elementary. Also want to acknowledge the work of the moms at East High and how they've inspired other parents and community people to get involved at La Follette High. Also had moms stepping up with some other community people as well there to show their support for the students and for the staff. What an amazing feeling to go over to La Follette. One of the moms actually said to me, yes, we're spreading it over here at La Follette, doing the same thing. So I thought that was very powerful In our district, we're seeing a lot of powerful things happening with people and relationships, and we want to continue to work at it. We're not perfect, but we are going to continue to work at it. So tonight, I wanted to kind of an announcement about our ESSER III dollars, the American Rescue Plan dollars that many people have been talking about. And it's the 40 right now, at this point, we're earmarked to get a significant amount of dollars, $42.4 million here in our district. And these dollars aren't just a free flow. They're really to support where we've been as a district, as everyone, the last 20 plus months been going through this pandemic. The requirements of the grant, the dollars, I shouldn't say grants, the dollars, that we have a safe return to school plan. And this is what we've been working on. And as we've stated many times, our mitigation strategies, we have been on top of them, working closely together. 20% reserved of evidence-based strategies for addressing learning loss in our schools. We also are required to have community and stakeholder input with these particular dollars, and to have a maintenance of equity in terms of the plan that we have. And we have a spending deadline 2024. We have our CFO tonight who's going to be going over some of these things. I'm just giving you a highlight of some, but he will go over this in his presentation tonight. And when we start talking about evidence-based strategies, it's kind of like a little educational jargon, right? But in short for you, it's just basically those strategies, those activities, all those things that are being done at the evidence base refers to that activity, that strategy, and how it has been proven or research to give us some real results. The maintenance of equity, when we talk about that, those schools, excuse me, it's basically a requirement for districts to maintain spending and staffing ratios at the top quartile of those schools identified by high poverty demographics. And we want to make sure that we also satisfy the other two tests that they have in this particular offering awarding of dollars. And those two tests are the fiscal test. The ratio of state and local spending by pupil at these school sites must be higher than the previous year. So we can't go lower than what we had previously. The other particular piece by this is that we have the staffing test, the ratios of the state and locally funded FTE by these particular pupil, I'm sorry, by these, I'll say that again if I lost you on that, okay? That it does not, the staffing ratios of the state and locally funded FTE by pupil at these sites must be higher than the previous year. So those are the two basic tests there. And the other things within the requirements, we're going to have our CFO go over them later. We're very excited for this opportunity to receive these dollars, and we have to be fiscally responsible as we're doing so. And the requirement that we involve others as we're doing this planning, I think it's very positive, and it should help us. It not should, it will help us see some positive results as it has already with our particular mitigation strategies as we've looked at each facts and all the other things that we've had to do from a sanitary standpoint to ensure the safety of everyone. That's my call.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. Ross, I see that you're ready to present.
I'll start the presentation in just a couple seconds.
Actually, Barb, I'll start it if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Good evening. Oh, turn my camera off. Good evening, everyone. Yes, thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for the introduction. I do want to get this up on screen here real quick. Does everyone see the presentation okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this evening, I do want to give everyone a brief overview of ESSER III, which Dr. Jenkins started to already, and ground us in the idea that when we get back from break, we have a lot of heavy work ahead of us when we talk about the budget process for 22-23. The reason I want to highlight ESSER III tonight is because we have requirements of the grant we need to consider, and we also have the need to establish the beginning of our community input process. So once again, the American Rescue Plan is the third federal COVID relief law passed in March of 2021. Madison is expected to receive approximately $42.4 million in ESSER III funding. Once again, since this is the third award, the funds must be used to support our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Funds are intended to help safely reopen our schools and sustain the safe operation of our schools and address the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. So once again, I'll go quickly through the ESSER III requirements. We are required to maintain and update a safe return to school plan. I want to thank Karen Kepler and her team, who actually have been working on this for quite a while now, which is one of the reasons we were able to reopen this past fall. That plan, as we have it, is currently completed, but that doesn't mean we're done. We will need to be updating this plan as new challenges or changes emerge to address COVID-19. The big piece we want to make sure that I preview the board with is our stakeholder input. And we're currently in development of a timeline of how we're going to solicit feedback from not only our students, staff, and faculty, but also our community members. One of the new tools we have in development right now is our Let's Talk platform. We're going to be using sample language from the DPI to start soliciting feedback on what types of ideas we can use on ESSER III over the next 2 years. We're going to be establishing a website presence, including all of the requirements and planning that we have to date by use of Google Sites. We have the desire and need to schedule public input sessions, either via Facebook Live or in-person stakeholder input. And of course, we have our board meetings where we can disseminate and discuss other priorities on ESSER III that we want to discuss during the budget development process. As Dr. Jenkins mentioned, we have a requirement on the grant to identify 20% of our award to implement evidence-based strategies and interventions to address learning loss. Just for some examples that were listed in the guidance from DPI, some things we could do are additional summer learning or enrichment, establishment of extended day or extended school year services, and after school programming. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of the base examples provided in the language. Maintenance of equity is another new requirement of the ESSER III requirements that is new. And when we talk about equity, it's important to distinguish that equity has many different definitions across the country, locally as well. And when we talk about maintenance of equity for ESSER III, the tests we're attempting to meet here are a very narrow definition of equity. We are required to protect the top quarter of high poverty schools in our district by meeting the following 2 tests. And these graphics start to assist identifying what those look like. The fiscal test, in a nutshell, states that our spending per pupil must be higher or equal to the previous year. And our staffing test, meaning our FTE measure at a given building in these top quartile, the ratios must be higher or the same as the prior year. In general, these aren't necessarily difficult tests to meet. We would never put ourselves in a situation where we would intentionally reduce spending per pupil or staffing per pupil at a given site. Any anomalies we would identify would either be due to valuations of said FTE or perhaps a cost differential based on individual staff members. Again, that would be a very rare example, but just some ways of how we would need to be monitoring that impact so that we don't fail one of these tests. Use of ESSER III, again, direct response to and mitigation of COVID-19, but the grant itself is structured on the WISE grant portal in 5 buckets, for lack of a better term, and they're listed here. Preparedness and response, some examples of that are fairly self-evident: personal protective equipment, PPE, sanitation, indoor air quality measures, outreach services for special populations, addressing needs for ELLs, English language learners, IEPs, and learning loss, educational technology, devices, software, infrastructure, cybersecurity, addressing long-term school closures, LTE needs, sub-needs, food service, and software needs. And finally, and not at all least, is mental health services and supports for students and staff. Before we move on, I just want to point out the reason that we have 2 topics in this presentation is because the budget process for this year is going to be different than any other year. We're going to be running 2 essentially large budget processes in parallel from the January all the way through our April and June timelines for preliminary approval. That being said, we still need to follow some of our similar procedures on how we frame the budget work and what our work is going to be after break. In January, we have an operations work group meeting where we're going to be discussing a lot about what goals and priorities we need to establish as an administration and a board, and how we're going to frame our budget priorities over the next several months. At the same time, we need to start identifying what are some one-time costs on ESSER III that we can discuss, again, in parallel with a lot of our budget process, understanding that this is one-time money and that we only have 2 years to provide meaningful use for that across the district. As a reminder, I do want to highlight some of the budget factors that we've been stating since this last July when the state approved the biennial budget. We do have some challenges ahead of us. Namely, we know that we have $0 per pupil in the current budget year and the next budget year. We have significant declining enrollment, and we're currently set to generate approximately $12 million in emergency non-recurring exemptions. Apologies, that should say 12 million, not $12. I would love it to be $12, but I know it's not. So again, these are not unique to Madison. Districts across the state are encountering these challenges right now, where we know that we will have inflationary costs in the coming year, and there's going to be many things making it difficult for us to do our planning appropriately. Other local and state factors that are occurring right now, we know that we have system-wide staff shortages. We're having transportation challenges, again, staff shortages in terms of drivers, and an increased need for technology and instructional solutions as we move forward in navigating our dual forms of instruction, either in person and in virtual environments. Once again, I want to provide some context to some of the challenges we're looking at right now. This is a graph of Madison's enrollment. There's 2 lines here. There's a 3-year rolling average indicated by the green line on this chart, and a 1-year current year enrollment change in the yellow line, which is the lower line. The reason I put this graph on the screen is because there's how we're funded and how we're actually seeing our enrollment change. In the state funding model, we're funded based on a 3-year rolling average. So our mitigation of the significant enrollment challenges we've seen the last 2 years are reflected in the green line, and we're adapting in the funding model to those changes. But on a 1-year basis, it is easy to see that we've seen a massive decline in our 1-year enrollment, which is having significant pressures on not only our staffing needs, but our capacity needs in our buildings. And once again, this is a graph of how the state has treated K-12 education in terms of our inflationary cost per pupil under the revenue limit. Since the early 90s, we've seen a relatively stable increase of about $200, a little more than that per pupil for what looks like 15 years. But in the last 10 years, we've seen significant deviations and even one negative adjustment, of course, following the enactment of Act 10 back in the 11-12 school year. And finally, I do want to highlight the challenges that we're facing right now in regards to the revenue limit itself. So in a declining enrollment situation and $0 per pupil, the state funding formula is producing some rather anomalous results. More specifically, we're projecting approximately a loss of another 150 students going into next school year. In the revenue limit formula, we're generating those 2 non-recurring exemptions I keep talking about. Declining enrollment, of course, which is a normal exemption in a given year, and this hold harmless exemption, which occurs when our base revenue limit is calculating below what our revenue limit was the prior year. In the formula, though, what's actually happening is a little bit of a paradox. When we say we're going to go down 150 kids, we're generating approximately $11.6 million in non-recurring exemptions. But even a slight deviation in that 1-year enrollment shift moves our 3-year average in such a way that if our enrollment goes down more than we're projecting, than that 150 students per pupil, in this case, I have 2 examples here. If we actually end up going 200 pupils down, our exemptions under those categories actually increase. And vice versa. If our enrollment improves in this situation and we only lose 100 students next year, our exemptions decrease. So I'm currently following our enrollment projections for purposes of modeling what we're going to discuss in January, but I want the board to be aware how volatile this number is going to be over the next several months. Our enrollment is going to matter significantly when we talk about what types of challenges and gaps we need to address as we begin in January and go all the way through the April and June timeframe. That being said, I just wanted to highlight these factors for you today as an update, because we are going to be doing a soft launch of some of our communication around ESSER III and start soliciting feedback so that we have something to discuss in operations work group in January, and maybe even the board meeting and the regular board meeting in January. So with that, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ross.
Yeah, I have about 4 of them. One, thank you, Ross. This was incredibly thorough. And I really thank you on that. One, and this is my biggest fear, can the legislature get a hold of these funds and block them the way they have with other parts of Evert's budget? Is that possible?
Are you referring to ESSER III, Nikki? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So the Department of Education at the federal level has approved the majority of Wisconsin's plan for ESSER III. So I'm not aware of any way that they could reallocate ESSER III at this point once the awards are given to the states. At this point, the amount that each district is eligible for has been published. And short of a non-compliance issue, I don't think there's any way that that award can be pulled short of massive sequestration where the federal government would have to prorate their awards. But that's pure speculation on my part.
That's good to know. Secondly, you said that there's a maintenance of equity. Is there a maintenance of effort similar to disability law on how much we provide with ESSER III?
I'm glad you asked that because I think the only reason that they called this maintenance of equity was not to directly confusing it with maintenance of effort. Maintenance of effort, of course, is specific to special education. So they're held separate in that maintenance of effort for special education is still its own set of tests. And maintenance of equity is only a test for ESSER III eligibility.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you said staffing is a problem and we have a problem with our FTE and not having having staff shortages. This is not a COVID question. Can we do a general sick leave bank totally so that we could possibly attract more staff with ESSER $3?
I guess I would need you to elaborate on your question. If you're talking about establishing a sick bank and its impacts on hiring, I would only be able to speculate on that impact.
Okay. Then never mind. And then just one other question. On the ESSER funds, do they say that we could use it for, you said summer programming. Can we also use it for maintenance equipment like ramps for individuals with disabilities that are out of compliance, outdoor classrooms, etc.?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So the 5 categories I mentioned in the presentation are really where we should be framing uses of how we want to use ESSER III. Again, the ESSER awards are given to districts primarily to address and respond to the impacts of COVID-19. So accessibility, if we could make an argument under one of those 5 areas where that would be applicable, possibly. Keep in mind that whatever we put forward, we have to submit to DPI as part of our ESSER III plan. And DPI has every right to look at that plan and approve or reject it. So it's something we can consider, but I can't make any promises until we have DPI sign off on our plan.
Understood. Yeah. The reason why I'm asking on whether to consider is the number of special needs students who had significant learning loss, especially in special needs that are requiring extended school year options, is quite large.
Yes.
And so because that will be a financial burden to the district financially, there is a possibility, I was wondering if to recoup that through ESSER III.
I guess all I can say is that it's possible, but I can't answer that question directly with a plan to submit to DPI.
Perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Ross, thank you so much for this presentation. This is great preparation to go into our conversation in January. So we're ready. I have a couple questions about the maintenance of equity. First of all, what is the start date for that? When are they going to start calculating maintenance of equity?
So I maybe had it up too quickly. The tests will be, the base year is this year, so 21, 22. And then for next year planning, we will be implementing those tests for that top quartile of buildings. And part of the challenge for me as I try to navigate those requirements is the test point, the measure point of when the top quartile is established is still not clear in law. So right now, we know that we have some variation each year in our student populations that move those measures of high poverty, right? So as we prepare for next year, I'm only watching probably a little bit more in the top quartile with the expectation that those demarcations may move between now and the measure point. And that was in a couple of listening sessions around understanding this provision in DPI seminars that I'm just trying to be cognizant of. But again, as we talk about our regular budget process, I don't consider this to be a particularly difficult test to meet in terms of our budget process, as we do build in inflationary cost into many things we do. So as we put that together, I'll be watching it closely, but I don't anticipate that we will not be able to meet those measures.
Thank you. My second question is related. So it basically sounds like we've got two different sources of non-recurring funding coming into MMSD next year. One is ESSER III and one is our non-recurring exemptions. And from what you just said, it sounds like our non-recurring exemptions are potentially more volatile than ESSER III because we don't know our enrollment. And it also is potentially going to have, the non-recurring exemptions are assessed and ESSER III is a grant from the federal government. So I guess my question is, do we have flexibility with non-recurring exemptions to not assess to the maximum with those if we have adequate one-time funding coming from ESSER III to reduce the burden on the taxpayer, especially since we don't know what's going to happen with equalized property value? And if we did that, what would happen to our maintenance of equity?
Okay, a lot to unpack there. Let me see if I can.
So if we were to not take some of these non-recurring exemptions, would that reduce our per pupil spending to the point where we couldn't meet our maintenance of equity requirement?
Potentially, but a lot of the cost that would be part of those tests would be fixed long before we set the levy. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about our staffing plan for the coming year, and we're talking about meeting the staffing test and even the local spending per pupil test, 80% of our budget is on people. So when we're talking about establishing those ratios in planning for next year, we would have a lot of those costs established before we even got to fall. So if our enrollment did shift, we may have to make other one-year adjustments in the budget to accommodate what happens to those non-recurring exemptions. But to your point, would they be included in the ratios? Yes, but by that point, I would think we've already had met those tests and passed them, such that we wouldn't have to worry about that volatility at the end of the budget process.
That's helpful to think about. I'm also just wondering if, as we go through this budget cycle, we should be thinking about not taking our maximum non-recurring exemptions as we did this year, if we have adequate funding coming from ESSER III to meet all our needs in terms of one-term funding.
Right. And that's a recommendation I gave you all in the fall as well, because again, in this odd scenario we find ourselves in, where if our enrollment is worse than we predict, those exemptions bubble up to the point that we haven't planned for those expenses. Again, if we had any inflationary increase on the revenue limit, this would not occur. That declining enrollment exemption would kick in and essentially put us where we thought we were going to be in June, right? So last spring, when we were planning the budget for June approval, we were skating right at the line where hold harmless would have kicked in, understanding that if we went worse, we'd have to think about this over the summer. Now that we're in the thick of non-recurring exemptions and hold harmless, I'm preparing for a much more volatile swing once that enrollment number comes in September. So if we find ourselves in that situation again, I would certainly be looking at suggesting under levy, because that funding is coming out of a formula that wasn't designed to work this way.
Thank you. That's all my questions. That's really helpful, Ross. I appreciate it.
Questions, that was really helpful. Board Member Lucy. Board Member Morale.
Thank you so much, President Muldrow. Thank you so much, Ross, for this really important conversation. I wanted to go back a little bit on, you mentioned, and I'm trying to find the slide that you were speaking to, how the scaffolding of the supports needs to happen, in particular in regards to the schools that meet the top quarter of
This one?
trying to remember exactly how top quarter of high poverty schools. Can you tell us again how many schools are we talking about? What's the percentage?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's not, it doesn't address what threshold qualifies you for high poverty. It simply takes all of your schools and in rank order looks at the ones with the highest poverty measure and starts placing them in rank order. Once that's done, the top fourth or top quarter of those buildings would be subject to this test. One thing I didn't mention when I brought this up before is this does not mean that we have a higher spending per pupil at the high poverty schools per se. Such, for example, a smaller school may have a higher measure a higher cost per pupil just by virtue of overhead. Whereas a large school that may have a high poverty measure may have a lower spending per pupil. This isn't about establishing that the highest poverty school spends the most per pupil and down the line. It's that at a one school basis from one year to the next, that ratio must not move.
Got it. And then, is it also making sure that we are, does it also include that there's particular strategies that needs to be happening with those schools? Or is just saying we need to make sure that those schools are having our targeted approach in regards to our funding?
So to clarify, this is an eligibility test that Madison has to meet to access its ESSER III funds. It's not about spending the ESSER III funds, and the tests themselves don't even include ESSER III funds. It's just identifying that the federal government has said for those students that could be considered on a numbers basis higher need than others, we want to make sure those buildings are protected one year to the next. That strategy is something we can define locally. But this is just a way to determine eligibility for ESSER III for our district.
Got it. I think I'm connecting now. So let's go to that place where you're just saying, have we identified how are we going to, what is it going to look like for those top quarter high poverty schools?
I would not be able to speak to that specifically, but we have a steering committee in place that's going to start looking at use of these dollars that can be used to lift up those buildings through some of the 20% holdback we have to identify for learning loss. But the targeted strategy as a district is something we're going to be talking about as a group over the next several months.
That's exactly what, thank you so much for answering the question I did not ask really well. I just have a comment on the slide that comes right after that in regards to the use. I would really love to see a comprehensive strategy around credit recovered, in particular for English learners and students that are receiving special education services. With the last 2 years of, in-home, virtual, students have, had a loss of opportunity to make sure that their grades and their instructions are in alignment, and the students that have a post-secondary plan that might have also been impacted by how, this last couple of years have been. So I'd love to see a targeted strategy around credit recovery, in particular for ELs and students with IEPs. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ross.
Bye.
Thank you so much for your questions, Board Member Morelli, for the discussion. Board Member Goldschmidt.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Ross, for this presentation. I'm wondering that as we start to grapple with the funding that we are going to receive for ESSER III and start to get community impact, I'm wondering if we could get a very high level summary of the spending that we did for ESSER I and ESSER II to sort of put into context what we've already invested in and where we may have, I don't want to say miss something, but where more investment is needed, and I guess basically what we've already done.
Thank you for that. This actually came up, I believe, at the meeting last month as well. I'm in the process of cleaning up those schedules right now. I hope to put those out in a weekly update for all of you so you can see. I know we had a schedule that we were providing last year at a periodic basis, and I've not reestablished that cadence in my head yet. So I will certainly get that out to you as soon as I can.
That would be great. I think the context of that would be fabulous. And then I'm looking at the sort of 5 bucket list that you gave us and wondering, in the context of trying to get community feedback on investments, I'm just wondering if the board needs to have a conversation around, okay, here's where we spent it already. Here's these 5 buckets of what we're eligible for. And at some point, I think we're gonna need a baseline assessment of where we're at and where students are at and where, I mean, we keep talking about mental health is very different from before COVID. And you know, some people are calling it learning loss. I'd like to say new baseline from where we were when we would have where we might have expected to be before COVID. And so I'm sort of wondering if it's possible to do that before we start asking for community feedback to sort of give more context to the community as we're starting. Does that make sense?
It does, although I still think there's benefit to soliciting unmitigated feedback from the community just to get the dialogue going. As I said, this is not something we're going to have one conversation of and be finished with. So I'm certainly hoping to get feedback as soon as possible so that when we start this discussion in January, we could start to funnel down a lot of our needs as we identify we did spend X amount per student on technology. That, you know, do we really need to hold back that type of amount of ESSER III? Perhaps not. Those are the types of things that we need to explore as a group. But if we wait too long for feedback, we're probably just going to miss other opportunities we might not be thinking of right now.
Okay, sounds great. Just try to figure out how the conversation is going to go when the conversation is happening in tandem with the board at the same time. So I completely appreciate that. And then I have a question on the declining enrollment and hold harmless exemptions. And just to clarify sort of in my head, they're designed as an early warning to give us time to adjust our spending over multiple years. And if we continue to have declining enrollment and take these exemptions, we sort of bring us to this, I don't want to say fiscal cliff. Is that an accurate way to say that? We somehow have to adjust.
That's correct. So, I mean, you're correct in that I've even myself framed the exemptions as a early warning system. The way declining enrollment is calculated in the revenue limit formula is to allow districts that breathing room to adapt as either their service levels or spending decrease from one year to the next. The danger in the current situation is that the hold harmless exemption continues to erode our base revenue limit on top of that. So it's happening much faster than we normally would think. We do have some mitigation in the fact of our operating referendum, but it is true that we're going to start to see that revenue factor slide until the enrollment patterns start to stabilize or at least provide a straight line as opposed to a dipping line in that graph.
And then I would just like to remain hopeful and optimistic that after this, we get through this biennial budget that we're working under, that the state will see the importance of investing that per pupil funding and investing in our public schools for the next biennial budget. I think that's all the questions I have right now.
Thank you so much for speaking to that board member Schmidt. Board member Vanderbilt, I see your hand and I want to recognize it. I also want to let myself in for just a moment.
yeah.
Ross, I think piggybacking on the comments you were making with Chris Gomez-Schmidt, I think the truth is that we know that we're going to continue to see a decline in enrollment. The lowest rate of birth was 2019. That was the lowest birth rate year since 1987. That group of children starts 4K in 2023. They start kindergarten in 2024. Looking back to the last time we faced this kind of decline in enrollment that was driven by birth rate, that's going back to 1992. What are some of the things that we can do to kind of adjust in this current moment to the kind of inevitable decline we're going to continue to see as it relates to birth rate? And I guess, do we have any indication that 2020, 2021 would be higher birth rate years, that we would recover some of that enrollment?
So I'm not able to speak to the enrollment patterns right now, but I do know that as we try to navigate some of the last times we were thinking about low birth rates and what happened to state funding, we also have to remember that the state funding formula was in a much different condition. We had an inflationary cost per pupil on the revenue limit. So even under declining enrollment, the losses or the exemptions that we were dealing with at the time were much less than they were now. And in many cases, that inflationary cost per pupil outpaced the decline impact in that declining enrollment exemption. it truly is a perfect storm what we're dealing with right now that is putting us in this situation.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Ross. Board Member Vandermillen.
I just wanted to follow up actually on what Chris Gomez-Schmidt stated. I think that the board, I'm all for community feedback. I really am. The issue is when we got into the big ideas, it almost felt like it was hard for the board to collaborate with the big ideas because they were almost like parallel tracks that never met. Is there a way to do more collaborative with feedback so that way decision-making is still shared? If that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm
Board
sorry.
Member Vandermillen, I'm gonna ask that you direct that question at the superintendent.
Okay.
I totally know what you mean when we get the big ideas, but even right now, looking at our budget in the timeline, Ross and I have had these conversations by when we do want to have ESSER III, I stated earlier, calls for us to have feedback. So by opening it up now, as he's trying to do, we want to come to you with real feedback that we've already received. And so in January, we can have a more informed conversation. And I also appreciate what Ross said, not leading necessarily the public in terms of their thoughts. We're having it wide open, and then we can come in at the end of the day. We're going to continue to work together. But I appreciate the thought of let's be collaborative about it. But we do want to have free thoughts from the public, and we want to share the information, what we've done. I think the question from Member Gomez-Smith is the question of what we're doing to updates and what Ross is going to do is share out what we do with 1, 2, and 3. And he began to mention some of those things. And as we do that, we as a group, as a whole community, the board, community, administration, everybody, our MTI principals can collaborate on this process. That's what we're hoping, that we co-create this as we move along, but not ahead of one another.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Dr. Jenkins. Further discussion? Schmidt?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in addition to the declining birth rates, I think just the pandemic of COVID had a really large effect on our enrollment. And so whatever we can do to make sure that we are addressing the needs of students and families moving forward, addressing the needs of our staff, and doing this all collaboratively to make a really strong school district, that's what we need to do together as a board, as the administration, and with our staff and our families.
Speaking to that, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt. All right. If there's no further discussion, Ross, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening and for all the work you're doing. We look forward to, having this conversation with you many more times.
Thank you.
Nancy Moffett. Mofenta. Dr. Mofenta. I see your hand up, Dr. Mofenta, so I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to take just a moment to address Board Member Morelli's comment and question about our scholars with an IEP, just to make sure that the board is aware that based on the known potential impact to each individual scholar of the pandemic and primarily having virtual services last year, we asked our special education case managers to conduct an analysis after first quarter progress reports of progress toward annual IEP goals and progress in the general education curriculum. And so we will be analyzing that data over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have by mid-January the set of our scholars who we will need to provide additional / what DPI is calling recovery services to for the remainder of this year and into the summer. So I just wanted you all to be aware that that analysis was conducted and that we will be looking at that data over the next few weeks.
Thank you so much for joining us, and Board Member Morelli.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Mofenta. It's great to see you here. Can you give us a little bit of a timeline on which group of students will be then benefiting from whatever strategies you are implementing? Is this a 2022-23 school year, our current students are going to be able to take some advantage of some of the findings and the strategies that you are putting in place?
Yes, absolutely. So what we have asked is we have asked for our special education case managers to either convene an IEP team meeting prior to the start of second semester, or connect with all IEP team members, including parents, to talk about what services we would offer, and then ask about when it would work to provide those. So asking scholars and families, knowing that some of our scholars are able to kind of beef up their special education services and intensive services right now for second semester for the rest of the school year, and others just sort of don't want to compound services and want to wait until summer to have additional services or recovery services. So really it will be an IEP team decision, but working with scholars and family members about what will work for them. So second semester will be an option, but we realize that some may prefer to wait until summer.
I have a follow-up question in regards to parent advocacy on that. How are parents even, I mean, I know as a parent, I did not know that that was an option for my students. So how are they learning that this is an option that they can advocate for? How is that working?
Sure. Yep. That's a great question. So we've talked about it a couple of times at the Special Education Advisory Council, but recognizing that that's a small number. And so I have prepared a letter actually a couple of weeks ago as the analysis was being conducted by case managers to go out to parents. And we're currently waiting for the interpretation on that. So there will be a letter going out to all families to explain. That includes the questions that were used for the analysis and the option.
Thank you so much, Dr. McClendon. Thank you so much, President Mudir, for allowing more expensive time for this particular item.
I think it's incredibly important. I want to thank you so much for raising that, and thank you for engaging in the conversations. Reports on items that proceeded through the instruction work group held on December 6th, 2021. So a review of last week, everybody. Maya.
So our conversation on December 6th was a very lengthy conversation, but a very good conversation. We had a lot of things that were packed in. So as normal, we had our wellness check with the updates of the number of folks that were vaccinated. And I think Dr. Jenkins mentioned earlier, it's like 97% of our staff. And then it also included the next steps for those who were not vaccinated. Next, we had a presentation from the Joint Literacy Task Force and their recommendations. The task force is a partnership between the UW-Madison and our district that took on the charge to do a couple different things. So one was review the best practices and effective literacy instruction and developing our teachers, also looking at literary achievement data literary achievement data, and then also they examined how literacy is taught to teachers at UW-Madison in the School of Education, and also analyzing what possibly future teachers are going to learn about literacy and how to teach that. They also crafted recommendations to the school district and to UW-Madison, and we received a pretty lengthy report that at the time we didn't have a chance to look at, but it was definitely very eye-opening, I should say. The next thing that we had was a restorative justice and social emotional learning update about culture and climate. I thought, that this was a very great presentation because it had a lot of data directly from students and staff. And so we definitely got the voices of our students and staff, and then also like what to expect from each other and the next steps for restorative justice in our schools and social emotional learning. We also got the advanced learning update about the, so the advanced learning update that we had the presentation that talked about our equal opportunity schools and data, and then also about rigorous instruction for everyone and further opportunities across our district. Lastly, we had our safety plan updates. So, and I'll just read this. And so the Board of Education budgetary and policy decisions connected to keeping our schools safe are reflected in our district safety plan. Our safety plans and other requirements are provided by the Department of Justice on an annual basis as follows. 1, safety plans in most recent date Board of Education reviewed and approved revisions in school safety plans. 2, most recent blueprints or maps. 3, dates of the school violence drills held previous years and certification of Board of Education has reviewed. 4, date of most recent school safety training and number of attendees. 5, dates of safety assessments and conducted with local law enforcement. Something to note is that during these 3 quarters of 2020 and 2021 school year and moving from virtual to in-person, the Department of Justice provided school districts accommodations to conduct required school safety drills. The Board of Education members will receive an update to review the requirements in next week's Board of Education weekly updates. And then our school district's Office of School Safety, school leaders and school safety teams will conduct school safety assessments with local law enforcement, with our teachers union and other community agencies this semester, which I think is super important to note. So as we as the Board of Education look forward to updates and recommendations to strengthen our district safety plans in May and June. That was lastly, but just some things that are coming up in our next possible topics of our next instruction work group meeting is the use of assistive technology, and then summer acceleration 2022, and then more advanced learning, and then policies, possibly the health and wellness, and then also the age of students. So it's a lot going on and we're getting work done. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your leadership, Board Member Pearson. There are no action items that proceeded through the instruction work group held on December 6th. There are no action items this month that proceeded through the operation work group. There was no meeting held in December for operating. Board Member Carusi, can you please speak to our next meeting and its possible agenda?
I would be happy to do that. So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, January 18th. We will be launching our 2022-23 budget development process with a discussion about our budget goals, our budget values, and digging into our equity-based model for school budgets, which is different from maintenance of equity and ESSER III. We will need to address both of those things. We will also talk about ESSER III, get another update. And finally, we are slated to talk about policy 5011, which is a transportation policy, specifically in terms of middle school start times.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. I look forward to that meeting. All right. I move that the Board of Education adopt and approve all of the motions set forth in section 10 of the electronic agenda prepared for the December 13th, 2021 regular school board meeting, exactly as said motions are written. By voting affirmatively on this motion, a board member expresses his or her or their affirmative vote on each of the motions consolidated hereby, subject to any express separations that have been made by any member of the school board.
So moved.
Second from Chris Gomez-Schmidt. Any discussion or separations? Board Member Carusi.
I would like to separate 10.12 and 10.13.
Board Member Morelli.
Please separate 10.11.
Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
10.8.
All right. Nama, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. All right, we'll start with 10.8.
Yeah, this is the recommendation for core instructional materials for science. And there's a number of things that I just wanted to clarify on this consent item. One is where we are in the process. It appears that this is planning to move us beyond the early adoption cohorts and into full implementation at K-5. And I guess one of the questions that I have is I'm 100% behind new improvements in science and figuring out the curriculum that our schools need in order to effectively teach science. What I'm excited about this is the narrative around the fact that it works well in combination with our early literacy initiatives. I guess what I'm concerned about is that I see some quotes in there for teachers, but I'm wondering if we have an early cohort implementation analysis and results from our own district. And then I'm also hoping for some clarification on how this curriculum and training fits into the overall PD plan for elementary schools, along with letters training, other curriculum, and other implementation schedules. I guess one of my concerns is we keep talking about how schools are overloaded and trying to move forward, and we are still in a pandemic. And I'm just wondering if going full out on implementing this next year is the right decision when we are really focusing on that literacy component.
Great questions, Gomez Schmidt. I'm actually going to ask Patty Schaefer to come on screen as she is the director of STEM and has been behind this planning and implementation. So she can speak specifically to the data that we're seeing from our schools, as well as the professional development plans. I see Dr. Bell is also on the screen, so we can talk about the PD and the science of reading hand in hand.
Yes, I'll speak first to the first question that you posed in regards to what data we have on our own implementation. So as you may have noticed in kind of the timeline for where we've been with this project, we began implementation in the 1920 school year. And if you think about what has happened since then, really the availability of data is pretty limited for our own students from an academic outcome perspective and the impact that this implementation may have on literacy outcomes, as well as you know, that we do also some science assessments as a state in 5th grade. So we don't have that data particularly, and I think that's why we really wanted to lift some of the qualitative data and what teachers were already seeing in their classrooms overall.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to contextualize this and say that I completely am not looking for student outcome data based on this initial implementation. I guess what I'm looking for is process implementation and how this actually worked for the teachers, given that we are in a pandemic, and how it is working to make the switch and the time that is required at the same time that we're doing the literacy implementation.
Thank you. That's a great clarification to help me make sure that I'm responding to the question that you're posing. So I would say actually that that's been a key emphasis and why we did an early implementation. We really wanted to work with a select group of schools, right? A more smaller set so that we could learn early about what would be necessary for the implementation, so we could really scale that across schools before going right across all grade levels, across all schools, as we're proposing to do. And we've actually had the teachers, coaches, and principals from those schools informing not just the work that we did with them, but then helping to inform where we're going next overall. And what we've learned from that, first, the sort of getting started professional learning is relatively light in comparison to some of the other work that we've done, right? Especially in comparison to the number of hours that we're asking for the commitment with letters training and other pieces around early literacy. And I think it's because what we're learning from teachers is that really navigating the curriculum is not a heavy lift for them once they're introduced to it. You may have noticed also in the information we provided that the curriculum is a significant kind of shift for us from where we've been at for some time in our schools with FOSS, in that the curricular resources have flexibility to do both in-person and virtual. So it's actually been a huge benefit for schools that have already been using this over the last few semesters as they've been working with students in a virtual learning environment. We also worked with the Madison Virtual Elementary teachers this year to get them training and implementing it with their students, because we knew that was the better choice for the virtual learning environment. And that was an easy shift for them to make. So we're also learning with them and the flexibility of it. So Dr. Gabby Bell and I are working hand in hand in planning professional learning, but starting at the leadership level, ensuring that the work that we're doing in learning about the science resources really lift the literacy strategies that are built into the resources themselves, so that these don't feel like separate efforts, but they're actually really linked overall. And I don't know if, Gabby, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, you said it beautifully.
I guess one of the other questions I have is, even looking at the motion, I'm a little confused because it talks about that we approved like a $900,000 expenditure last March. And there was an $800,000 one in a previous fiscal year. And now the request is for an additional $674,000. But the motion is for the whole 1.6 million.
So I will clarify best I can about each of those particular dollar amounts that appear in the consent memo. So previous year expenditures was really focused on the early implementation, right? So the select schools and teams and grade levels. And that happened in 2 phases, starting in the 1920 school year, continuing last school year, working with those schools, including the Madison Virtual Elementary schools then. Last year in March, we were intending that we would be beginning an implementation with grades 2, 4, and 5. You may recall that some of our early thinking around the implementation of the letters professional learning had a grade level specific plan that was sort of threaded in what grade levels would be in which cohorts to get started with that, and how we would implement curricular resources side by side with that. So at that time, we thought we were going to be planning for a 3 grade level cohort this year, with the other grade levels to follow in the following year, right? Which would have still brought us to this conversation, but for only that subsequent dollar amount. Because of the shifts that we made with the letters training, we decided that this year wasn't the right year to start right, a partial grade level implementation. And at the end of last fiscal year, the board approved of carry over a fund balance of that approved amount to then be used and on that expenditure this year instead. So that's the right $900,000. The additional ask then is to ensure that we have resources at grades K1 and 3 to go with those funds, so that we really can finish the implementations for all grades K through 5 for teacher resources and kits that are all needed.
So we haven't done the implementation at grades 2, 4, and 5 yet?
Correct. That was what was approved last year, but the implementation was paused. And so the funds were asked to be carried over in a fund balance. So those are designated funds in the curriculum and instruction budget that's included this year. So the full dollar amount, 1.64 million and change, is for the full purchase that we'll make. That includes what was intended to be purchased for this year, but is now all for implementation in the next school year. So we worked with comptroller and Ross's team to ensure that the language we were using for the consent memo tonight fitting with what needed to be up for approval in order to move forward with it.
So how many schools have implemented this, and how many are we moving to? I guess part of my frustration here is I feel like we're doing scaling up decisions in consent memos instead of looking at our piloted process and making decisions from there. I don't know how other board members feel about that, but I just feel like it's a lot within this consent to be trying to figure this out.
Tim, I think it's Tim Thanks.
So I'm sorry, going back to my question, how many schools have implemented this and what are we moving to this year?
So we have 9 schools that have already gone through implementation, and the purchase that we're requesting right now gets us to scale. There are a few of those 9 schools who are not yet at full K-5 implementation, but we're moving so that all of our students in elementary schools next year would have the same aligned resources, and that our professional learning, right, and the links with our literacy, early literacy and beyond priority focus can happen with all of our schools rather than, again, right, kind of piecemealing that out in terms of our professional learning.
Board Member Morelli, then I saw Board Member Vandermeulen, then I saw Board Member,
Thank you so much, President Modrow. Thank you so much, Patty, for walking us through this memo a little bit more. My question is a little bit different. Given the dissenting views of what science is, how are you all navigating the alignment of y'all's work, the perhaps not as progressive approach that the state has been taking around science? That is my opinion. How and what's curriculum is available and how are they being updated to be in alignment to how we want the standards that we want to offer MMSD.
So I'm trying to think about what to speak to directly. So in terms of what you're really asking for in terms of like, how are we ensuring that this is really uplifting sort of our values and priorities in terms of what science education is, as a both links to that literacy piece, and how are we ensuring that we can actually implement that with teachers in classrooms so our students are really experiencing it in that way. So I would say that
yeah, it was more the first part of your interpretation than the second part, but the second part seems really relevant as well.
So I would say that actually was a really critical part of what led us to selecting Amplify Science as the direction forward for MMSD. The work that we've been doing that led to that early implementation in the 1920 school year really began with K-12 group of teachers who were who volunteered to be part of an early learning about the shift then that was in the 14-15 school year, what was then a national conversation about shifting science learning across our country overall, and really ensuring that going from where we were in science education, that we were really paying attention to societal issues that were really part of our science work. Certainly a lot has happened in society since then that it has connections to science, but I think the same is still true. And one of the really, I think, key places in thinking about where science education is now compared to where it was prior to that shift in standards is this idea that students really learn not by approaching science as a figuring out rather than learning about. So that we're really developing that critical thinking, and that they're knowers and doers and creators of understanding, rather than simply being told what to know and how to think about that and how the world works, that they're actually really engaging in that overall. And that early conversation with a K-12 group branched then into grade level specific that has carried forth in different directions, or really, I guess, continued progress in each of the grade bands. So a relatively small group of elementary teachers that were part of that K-12 group continued with us and expanded to include more members across more schools, and greater representation of diversity from our staff, and a representation of diversity of who our learners are from across schools. And those teachers really lifted the critical importance of the connections between science and literacy, as well as some of the early learning that students do about kind of important science themes like climate change, which was really relatively not at all present in our past and right kind of continuing science resources across schools. And that's just one example that's actually come up a number of times in the time since then overall. And I think some of the comments that you see from teachers in the consent memo, I think really lift the new energy that teachers and students themselves are feeling about science education as we're bringing in new resources that really connect more to kind of engaged ways of learning about science that position students to figuring out real world phenomena and taking on roles that really position them to think about themselves as scientists, engineers, and again, people actually engaging in the figuring out the way in which the world works around them. So I think that those being really key themes have really carried then into our implementation and what sort of teaching and learning science with an equity focus has really meant for us, and connecting to students, both the experiences they have in the world, but also expanding beyond what the world might have, right, what they might have experienced so far.
Thank you so much. I think I can see the passion that you have about this. I have a follow-up, if it's okay, President Muldrow, and maybe that's a Dr. Bell's question. I'm curious on how this curriculum and then this implementation is being translated into our DLI schools, both Spanish and Hmong, and this connection with sort of alignment with literacy and science. How have we pressure tested for some unintended consequence, in particular for students that are not accessing, literacy in the ways that they can access then a science content? I know that's the type of question.
That is a delicious question, if I may say so. Yes, we have done some really great thinking around that. So do you remember when I speak about the simple view of reading and word recognition and language comprehension, and how we speak about language comprehension as the ability for us to be able to engage with text, not only at the vocabulary level, but at the syntax, at the meaning-making level, to be able to really go in and decipher for meaning making. What is truly exciting about these resources for science is that the texts are so rich that they allow us to be able to do that and to experience that level of rigor and that that complexity of conversation that serves the mastery of literacy within a content of science. One of the markers that were very, very important as we were looking at resources that were worthy of this conversation and worthy of our students was the conversation about accessibility. So we also looked and ensured that, hi, Ms. Pearson, I love the heart, where that the resources are available in Spanish. Now, Hmong is a different pony. Hmong has been Romanized, so using has been transcribed into the Roman alphabet from the 1960s to now. It is an infant language in its literacy approach. So up to date, we have not been able to find publishers that do that. I am hopeful. I'm a praying woman. I'm hoping that somebody's going to do this one day for us. But right now, today, that doesn't exist. We continue to use all of the resources that we have available to us. We are fortunate in Madison as we continue to invest in people, and we are arming ourselves with BRSS and central office staff to be able to help us make sense of it. Explicitly connected to the Hmong bilingual program, because I believe that is the conversation that you're trying to get to. Science is taught in English in the Hmong bilingual program. So our children in the program will have access to the resource. Social studies is what is taught in Hmong. So a great level of intentionality have gone into it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So you're saying that for the DLI Spanish, so you mentioned the Hmong. I think you spoke really well to the Hmong. I feel like I understood, but what's happening for the DLI Spanish schools in regards to that? Are they also having science in English, or is the curriculum is in Spanish? That part I wasn't sure.
We have progression across the grade levels. And we have something that is called the content language allocation table. So content is taught in the DLI and the DBE programs in science in some specific quarters in Spanish, in some specific grade levels. The same thing happens in English. And the resource provides us for access in Spanish as well as in English.
Okay, so if you have a parent that's wondering if science DLI is different than science in a non-DLI school, you say, no, we are working on continue to
Same
integrate.
resource.
Thank you. That's the question. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Board Member Vandermill? Yes, I'm going to actually agree with Chris Gomez-Schmidt. I respect all the work of our team. I'm not an educator, nor am I a teacher, and I respect their hard work. However, when it comes to decisions of money and scaling up, I'm wondering if a consent memo is really the best way to do it, or if we do a consent memo and a board discussion. I'm wondering if it could be an and thing, so that way we can do full collaboration with the experts who understand it and the board who's making the decision in a way that way we could have both work together seamlessly.
So I do want to acknowledge that consent agenda doesn't actually prevent us from having a discussion. We've actually been talking about this item specifically for about a half an hour. And our team is rolling really deep tonight. I mean, I see Dr. Bell, we heard from Gabby Jackson, or sorry, Millie. I know your name. So I think our team is at the table right now if folks have questions and want to engage in the conversation. I do understand what you're saying, Nikki. But I think if we want to workshop this conversation, that's really up to the chairs of our operating committee and our instructional committee. So following up with them around that probably makes the most sense. Anything else, Board Member Vandermill?
That was it.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Board Member Pelosi.
Thank you. So I want to go off on the comment that this curriculum is very adaptable to online learning. On that same thread, I think that the biggest criticism I've heard of this curriculum, both within MMSD and reading about its implementation in other districts, is that it is far less hands-on than past science curricula have been, which is probably why it works well online, because you don't have to have anything at home to do the experiments. But the flip side of that is that kids lose out on the experience of actually doing science with their hands in the classroom if they're mostly engaging through a screen. And some of what I've read about Amplify Science is that districts that supplement Amplify with hands-on learning, it goes better. It's just a richer curriculum if kids get to watch it and they get to do it. And I'm wondering what our plans are to incorporate hands-on learning into the Amplify rollout. Are we just going to be following this curriculum as written, or are we planning to supplement with more hands-on activities in class to get kids excited about science by doing it?
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Chris, right? That has, as you noted, that's been part of the conversation in MMSD, and a lot of that actually started not specifically from our elementary implementation, but Amplify Science is also the new curricular resource, or relatively new curricular resource in middle schools. And in our team's review of the K-5 versus 6-8 resources, there is a slight difference in the design, both in terms of the ways in which text and the types of text that are woven in, how those sort of are fitting as sort of the learning progression within the units, as well as the number of units per grade level. All of those things take into account the developmental levels of the students, as well as kind of the sophistication of the science phenomena that students are studying. So in all grade levels, there certainly are still what I think a lot of us see as the hands-on components, right? So there are things that students would engage in that require materials in the classroom. Those certainly get scaled back when we're using a fully virtual environment, right? As a number of things have to shift. So when I mentioned that it has that flexibility, it's certainly still with significant limitations. You don't end up implementing the full units in the same way that you would in a classroom. So what it looks like this year for students and staff is different than what it looked like last year as we were in a virtual environment. That said, the implementation both at the elementary and the middle school levels has continued to be a partnership with Amplify Science. Since the first early implementation we've done, we've given them continual feedback as they've also heard from other districts that they're working with across the country. And what they've done is they've also worked to add additional hands-on components within each and all of their units across grade levels. So that's a partnership that we're continuing with them. From what I hear from our teachers in our elementary schools, they aren't feeling that same, at least not at the same scale. They aren't feeling that scaling or the hands-on issue to the same extent. And I think it has to do with just, again, how the units and lessons themselves are designed, because a lot of the activities are a little bit shorter so that it fits within the instructional time within the elementary environment. And hand in hand with the teachers who've been using Amplify, we've gotten their input so that we're ensuring that, first of all, what resources are already built into the units, we're really lifting those for engagement, as well as continuing to look at ways that we can extend that and be providing support for resources. So I would say that it's kind of an ongoing conversation. And I don't know that we would say upfront that that means that we're supplementing. It's really just looking for ways that we continually enhance it. And that also is some of the work that we're doing in partnership with the advanced learning team. Dr. Sharon Alexander and her team have really started to learn with us about the resources so that we're looking at it kind of from a full scale in that way.
So may I add some commentary here? And again, I accept full responsibility of any confusion tonight. But as I explored this consent item with the team, I reviewed this document heavily and saw that this initiative started back in 2014. It went through the entire process of being vetted by the board, approved to where we sent out an RFP, we made purchases. Currently, it has been implemented in 9 of our schools since 2019. We've had many of our schools who were asking and requesting science materials and supplies. We had the money in the budget, or have the money in the budget. We thought this would be a great time to be able to provide those resources to the schools who have been asking for these as well. We realize that there's a lot of training, et cetera, to go along with this, which we will do. And so I wanted to lift that to say that this is not like we're doing something to schools, we're answering the bell, if you will, for what they've been requesting. The total amount for this entire implementation has already been approved. Original plan was to roll this out in stages. And as someone inquired earlier tonight, whether or not we piloted the program yet. Yes, since 2019 has been implemented, and sure, we may not have enough data to determine the impact for us in MMSD yet, and that is yet to be seen. But I just want to articulate again that this was already vetted, already presented to the board. And I'm very thankful that we're having this conversation about science, because we've talked about early literacy and beyond for so long. We negate the fact that we have math, numeracy, if you will, and we have science. And when that question came up earlier tonight, what is our plan? What is our plan to accelerate learning for our students after the pandemic? This is a part of that planning process. So therefore, on the back end of this, we don't have to wait to complete this process, and so I just wanted to lift that tonight, but I definitely welcome all of the questions that are coming out. And I was just sitting here just taking it in, and I trust me, the team and I, we will go back. And if you have additional questions, we'll be more than happy to come back and have that conversation with you. But again, I take full accountability for it. I use my professional judgment based on the historical data that I had around this initiative, and we acted on it. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Pryor. I'm gonna move us along. I move that the Board of Education approve the purchase of online licenses and instructional material for teachers and students from Amplify Science using $1,640,219.60 from curriculum and instruction funds, CRLM funds.
Second.
Request a roll call vote.
No problem. Roll call vote. I'll start with myself. Board Member Muldrow, aye. Board Member Morelli.
Aye.
Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Aye.
Board Member Vandermeulen.
Nay.
Board Member Pearson.
Aye.
Board Member Carusi.
Aye.
Board Member Castro.
Aye.
Mama, I'm so sorry. Your advisory vote.
No worries. Aye.
Motion carries 5-2.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along. The next one that was pulled was 1010. I move that the Board of Education agrees to purchase AACPL and ALIRA licenses for both ELI and world language students from Language Testing International in the amount not to exceed $63,010 from the assessment and learning support budget.
Can I clarify? I'm sorry. I had 10-11.
Okay.
10-10 also? Okay.
I think so. 10-10. I pulled 10-11.
11, 12, 13.
I pulled 12.
I don't have 10 on the list.
All right,
Let's pull
that is passed.
11.
I move that the Board of Education approve paying the 2021-2022 educator effectiveness system fees in the amount of $182,232 to the Department of Public Instruction as part of our participation in the educator effectiveness grant. Second, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, any discussion?
Just recusing myself due to a conflict with my employer.
Thank you so much, Board Member Morelli. Nama, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye. Amanda, you were recusing?
Oh, yeah, I am.
I'm a nay.
It was a.
You're a nay? Okay, I'm gonna do the vote. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any recusals? Motion carries 5-1. My apologies.
5-1-1. Thank you so much.
5-1-1. All right. Comprehensive Energy Plan. I move that the Board of Education approve our contract via master's agreement for consulting services to create a comprehensive energy plan, CEP, using facility maintenance funds in the amount of $160,000, $100,000 reimbursement via grant funding upon completion of the plan.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermeulen. Any discussion?
So I pulled this one, and first of all, it's very exciting to have funding for comprehensive energy planning and MMSD. So thank you very much to the administration for seeking out this grant funding and getting it. I do, however, have a question about the choice of vendor and the fact that this was not sent out to bid. My first question is there a matching requirement for this grant? $100,000 grant, do we have to provide any match from general funds?
Yes, Board Member Carusi, Barbara, if you could unblock me from the camera. But I have Mike Starr here to go over the process for the comprehensive plan as well.
Right, so the answer to the question, Chris, is no, there is no match.
Thank you. And in that case, so our grant is $100,000. The bid came in at $160,000, and there was not a competitive bid. The reason for not sending out to bid was because We have a master architectural agreement with the company that is going to do this for us, but that agreement does not say it's an exclusive agreement. Like, we can still send stuff out to bid, even though we have this agreement in place. And I'm just wondering if we'd sent it out to bid, we might have gotten a company who came in closer to the $100,000 amount that's covered by the grant, which would have saved us some money. So I'm fully in favor of this, and I'm wondering if we need to take a step back and send this out for a competitive bid to see if we can get a bid that's closer to the $100,000 we're being awarded.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, let me expand a little further upon the process for the grant. So MMSD narratives that have been supporting documentations and applying for the grant. We noted in there that our approximation for the study is $150,000, and 10,000 is of the $150,000. There was $10,000 or $12,000 of that we were qualifying as MMSD staff cost, and the remaining balance would be to a consultant. So although the grant was just for $100,000, our description and narratives did elaborate that we were expecting $150,000. So to answer that part of the question, the second question, putting this out to bid, I agree, Chris. I would have liked an opportunity to put this out to bid and find additional vendors that have qualifications and evaluate those. And I think that would have been a betterment here for sure. As it happens with the timeline of the grant and the deliverables that are required for the grant, we actually, there's 4 deliverables for the grant. The final deliverable is a report. And so the 4 deliverables are progress reports leading up to. Just the timing of working with to sign the grant agreement. The first deadline had already passed. They recognized that it was collaborative in our trying to sort out the agreement. So at neither fault of neither party, it was just a function of working through that. So at this time, our first deliverable will be actually the 2nd, and that's due mid January. So just as a function of the grant timeline, we utilized our in-house master agreements, which, as the board knows, those were competitively sought.
So if we were to postpone this for a month, would you be like jeopardizing this grant and this project?
That's correct.
Any further discussion? Now your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor? Motion carries 7-0. All right. It is recommended that the board approve construction manager Findorff contract amendment increase, signing of the guaranteed maximum price GMP of $7,500,501.
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Pearson. Any discussion?
Yes. I thought we were considering pulling this because of the amount of information. The 7.5 million is an extreme amount at this time, as much as I'd like to keep our buildings on track. This was an additional expense with the contractor, and I'm just not real comfortable with changing terms after the fact, and it's one.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, Board Member Vandermeer, and further discussion.
Yeah, so I dug into this, and it's a very complicated memo, and I appreciate the level of detail that you provided us. I was perplexed by the notes where it says that we're going to potentially send some of the trade packages out for rebidding, and then it goes on to say that Findorff can now bid as a general contractor. Could you elaborate on what that's about, what's going on at this point with these changes?
Hi, Chris. Or sorry, Cedric.
Go ahead. I was going to also allow Chris to let you all know that Findorff is also here to assist with any specific questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Mike.
Great. Yeah. So Chris, thanks for noting that. You're right. Yes, there are some intricacies to this memo, and those two that you named are related. So the board and at the start of the referendum, under leadership of Chad and Brandon, the approach that we went the referendum is being done as is a construction manager approach. So with that, one of the conditions or concerns was, although it is typical for a construction manager to bid on their own projects, in this case, from transparency standpoint, Chad and Brandon, and I assume leadership and likely the board had established that Findorf would not bid on the projects. And the hope there was, or the idea there was just in furthering transparency, furthering competitiveness, and making sure that, say, Findorf, we're not just handing Findorf. We would like this to be a competitive process. Obviously, we certainly want the community to benefit. And so from that end of things, it was in good spirit that we weren't going to have Findorf bid. Now, the way we've arranged these projects, the first one, which is before you tonight, of Capitol High School, is the smaller of the 6 referendum projects. It happens to be the last in the schedule. There's an intricacies to the schedule, but the point is we put this smaller project first, and I think we maybe noted this before. And one of the goals of bidding this project was to understand the bid participation. So in the consent memo, we outlined various things that we did to stir bid participation, which is important. For the Capitol High general construction bid, Findorf was not allowed to bid. Findorf, as our construction manager, was not allowed to bid as a general contractor. And what we found from that, despite Findorf on their end doing calling, trying to make sure there was awareness of the project to be bid, over at Building Services, we also have been making calls to contractors and making sure they're aware of bids, that this process is starting. We had an open awareness meeting to stir that as well. We published in the paper. So the name of the game is we would like a lot of participation. And specifically to, like I said, this is a smaller of the 6 projects. So the dollar amount was such that we could canvas this, understand what it was, and then decide what's the best interest of the district. And being that it's, I guess I don't want to get in too much detail, the specifics of the bids and the amount of participation, just knowing that we have bidding to go. But I guess the statement is that we didn't receive the bid participation as much as we would have hoped. And for Capitol High, that's okay. Some rebidding of some of these scopes are all right for the schedule, but for the other projects, for instance, La Folla is currently being bid. If we have the same conditions that existed for the Capitol High School, so for instance, if we had any any trade packages that had 0 bids, this would be a big problem for our projects. And in some cases, if we just have 1 bid, bid participation, of course, we want them to align with our budgets. So for those reasons, for bid participation, and because we use Capitol High School to find out what's the bid environment, which includes how busy contractors are, and then the arrangement of projects, the type of projects, we at Building Services, in order to maintain budget and schedule, we need Findorf to be another bidder in the process. We need them to bid in order to be sure we have coverage, as well as stir competition amongst other bidders so that there are enough bidders. And I guess as far as conditions that we're putting in, to be sure, as I said at the beginning, it is not unusual for a construction manager to be bidding on their own scopes of work. This happens all the time. The school district, in this case, happened to set it up that we wanted that separation, and we've gone through the checks and balances to find out the best interest of the school district is to have Findorf be bidding. So they're a separate team from the construction manager team. the general contractor team is a different team. They are sending all of the trade packages that are being bid on, in which Findorf is also a bidder, a bidder as a general contractor, to building services specifically. There's a separate bid form. It's transparent in the bid process, so the other bidders are also aware. I've even had bidders calling me to clarify. They say, well, when I'm looking at the Follett bids, it appears to me that Findorf is also bidding on this project. And we say, yes, that's confirmed. So I'll pause there because I think I walked all over the question there, Chris. So
that was really helpful. I guess my follow-up would be, are we allowing Findorf to bid on everything at this point? Or is there a cutoff? Like we only received 0 bids, 1 bid where Findorf gets to jump in? Like how are we deciding when Findorf gets to be a bidder, given that our original plan was to maintain separation?
yeah, great question. So before we got to the general construction, even for Capitol High School, we were, as we said, we were stirring bid participation. So we were making calls. So with some degree of measure, we had an idea if there were going to be trade packages in which we had very low coverage or no coverage. And so at that time, we had a decision to make as well. And we had considered the idea of letting Findorf bid. However, making it a sealed bid and making it such that we would not open that unless we didn't have any other bids, or unless we only had 1 bid for any particular trade package, and that would be some criteria in which we would use. So that's how we were considering to proceed for Capitol High School. But as we've said, Chad and Brandon were very thoughtful in setting up this process. So we didn't want to walk forward without kind of making sure. So I gave Chad a call, and my conversation with Chad led us to make the decision that we did, not to allow them to bid on the first project. But now that we've seen this, that has changed. And Chad, in my conversation with him, of course, I don't want to speak for him, but it was of the agreement that this made a lot of sense, that we'll measure and then we'll adjust. So Chris, you said, are they allowed to bid on everything? Yes. Right now, we have some rebidding to do for Capitol High School. The guaranteed max price has some items that we're proceeding to sign a guaranteed max price that with just allowances. We don't have a bidder for that scope that was qualified, and or we didn't have bidders for this particular scopes. And so they will be able to bid the rebid for Capitol High School, as well as moving forward. As we noted, those are larger scopes coming up. So we need them to bid those scopes and to ensure that we're gonna have budget. If we had decided, say right now, for whatever reason, we just continued that we would not allow Findorf to bid. We are in a bidding period right now for La Follette, and they are eligible for bidding, but in the event that we didn't, and we had received the La Follette bids and had no coverage, or maybe there was just one bidder on a particular scope and they overbid, excessively, and it put the referendum budget in jeopardy, we would have no recourse at that point then other than to say, this is unfortunate, it costs more money, and we now need Findorf to bid on everything, because at the end of this, we're just gonna have, we have to pay more money. So it's been an evaluation, Chris, I guess, to the point of the idea of how would we do this. And when I thought of that just sealed bid process prior to Capitol High School, we also considered the idea of what would this say to other prospective general contractors in the area. And just them hearing that Findorf is eligible to bid, or knowing that they have a sealed bid, we tried to consider the politics around that in the construction arena as well, and ultimately decided it just made sense to let them bid. And that way it's not confusing, it's straightforward, and bidders aren't wondering which scopes are they or aren't they. It's just straightforward.
Board Member Vandermeulen, Board Member Carusi, do you have more?
Thank you.
Yes, so currently there is not a delay in the La Follette project, correct?
That is correct.
And we don't anticipate one, do we?
We do not.
Then how exactly is that related to this contract on whether or not on Capitol High? I'm just really confused on how, whether or not a fictional scenario that we don't expect to happen is going to have any effect on this decision. I'm just very confused, and I hope the tone isn't affected. I'm losing my voice, so it's about ready to go. So please forgive me if it sounds off. But I'm really confused and hope you can help me out on it.
Sure, Nikki. Yep, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. So I did talk about several hypotheticals because I was mostly going through the analysis of swaying the considerations of when we would or wouldn't do this. So the question of is La Follette, right now, we're in a bidding period. So prior to the bidding period was our decision to allow Fendorf to start bid the project. That was indeed for us to protect the project, the entire referendum, not any one project. So by allowing them to bid, we thought that it was the best protection, knowing that we did not have great bid coverage, ideal bid coverage on Capitol High. We did not want the same situation to happen on a much, much more expensive project of La Follette.
Okay. That makes more sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. Any further discussion? How about your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor? I'm sorry. If you are in favor, keep your hand up for stuff. Or motion carries. Any objection or any abstentions?
I'm abstaining.
Abstention, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Let's do that again. Who's opposed?
Yes.
2 opposed, yes, and 1 abstention on whose part?
Or in favor.
Yours?
Abstain.
Chris. Thank you.
Motion carries. That is it for our consent agenda. City of Madison Education Committee, Board Member Morelli.
Yeah, thank you so much, President Modrow. We had a really great and important meeting this past week. Getting some updates from the city, who will be hiring a digital, well, that's not the official title, but someone that's going to be responsible for the digital inclusion efforts for the city. So I think that is a phenomenal opportunity for further collaboration. The committee continued to look at gaps in fundings in particular for our school district and how both the city and the county can align in the ways of supporting with allocation of resources or policies that can support our work internally. I'm looking forward to having you, President Modrow. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to join us for next month's meeting. As we are, I think, having some really important conversations, in particular, one of our shared priorities around supporting the mental health of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Morelli. Student Senate, Nama, can we hear from you?
Yeah, of course. So Student Senate has been working in their committees for the past few weeks. We've made progress as we're having discussions with other clubs around the district and getting those representation from schools such as Shabazz and Capitol High, working with clubs there along with La Follette and East to work in our anti-racist committee along with our civic committee and trying to kind of expand our horizons on the discussions that we're having. So we're excited to launch more into the discussion-based work that Student Senate does for the next year and the next few weeks of the rest of the December month.
Emma, thank you so much for your leadership. Madison School and Community Recreation MSCR Advisory Committee, Board Member Vandermeulen.
Our next meeting is December 15th. Unfortunately, due to a conflict, I cannot be at that meeting. If someone would like to attend in my place, it is via Zoom, and I can send them the link. We are planning on, again, discussing how to get more members and possible discussion on the school forest.
Thank you so much, Vandermeulen. I'll follow up with you about that meeting specifically. I move that the Board of Education direct Representative Chris Gomez-Schmidt to vote in support of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards 2022 resolution, items 22-01 to 22-10 at the January 2022 State Education Convention Delegate Assembly meeting.
Second.
Second, Board Member Pearson. Any discussion? Board Member Pearson and then Board Member Morelli.
I would like to pull a few for discussion. 22.05 and 22.06, which I would be happy to discuss together. And 22.08, 22.09, and 22.10, which I would be willing to discuss as a group. Okay. So 22.05 and 22.06 are both they're both about broadening the scope of mental health interventions, basically, and staff that are eligible for state reimbursement, which on its surface sounds like a great thing. And I'm just curious, would this actually benefit MMSD, or are we already like maxing out our reimbursement as it's written? And while we can diversify things that can get reimbursed without more state funding, it's not actually going to increase the funding coming into the district. Like, I'm actually curious what the impact of this, these two resolutions would be on the district.
Just for clarification, is it 22.03?
5 and 6.
I think Ross is joining us to speak to that. Ross.
I will take a stab at this, Chris, because as I read through these as well, I had some thoughts on these. It's important to know that the categorical aids that currently exist for mental health services are based on some certain appropriation at the state level, meaning that the state declares, I'll make this up, $10 million to be distributed to districts based on the claims that are received. And if the proposed reimbursement cannot be met with that sum, that the awards given to all districts are prorated until the $10 million is exhausted in a reduced fashion. This is exactly how special ed categorical aid works as well, which is why when they tell us we're going to get 30% as an estimate, by the time we're all said and done, we get more like 26, because they have to dial it back to meet the prorated claims of all district applicants. Now, the mental health services, I believe in here, it says $12 million under current law. We'd be looking at a similar situation where the some certain appropriation would be prorated down to the number of claims against that $12 million. For MSD, I believe overall, the claim is not a lot. I want to say it's less than $250K, which is currently budgeted in our categorical aid reimbursements right now. So what I would rather see in this category is a little bit more of a push for a sum sufficient appropriation for these types of claims, such that when they tell us they're going to give us, again, using special education as an example, when they say we're going to get 30%, I want to expect 30%, because the one thing that drives me crazy about these programs is they tell us what's going to be 30, but I know by the time we get to year end, it's going to be more like 26, 25, 24, whatever it is to match the some certain appropriation said the sufficient.
Thank you so much for pulling that, Chris. And thank you for speaking to it, Ross. You want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if that's, I mean, when I go and represent the board on this, you can make amendments on the floor. Is that something that the board would be interested in doing or investigating? I mean, having us come up with some language, or?
Yeah, I think that talking about some sufficient funds in terms of mental health is really relevant to this current moment. And I appreciate Ross for introducing an alternative that may work for the needs of our students. Any other discussion?
Ross, based on your comments, I see no harm in supporting these motions.
I would agree. Again, there's no harm in the motions. It's more of a I would like to see type of situation on here to help us with not only our planning process, but reliability at the state level for these programs.
Thank you. Board Member Carusi, do you want to speak to your other items?
Yeah, so 22.8, 22.9, and 22.10. These are all about WASB pulling out of the National School Board Association. I do not think we should support these 3 amendments because the desire to pull out of this association is highly politicized. It's highly politically charged. It's coming down on Republican versus Democratic lines or conservative versus liberal lines. And I don't think WASB should go that way. I think WASB should stick with the National Association. I think all districts should stick with the National Association. This association made some statements about difficult school board meetings during the time of COVID where things were getting so out of control. They felt that there might need to be protection of school board members, and the comments they made were inflammatory, and they apologized, but it did lead many school board associations, particularly in red leaning areas, to say we don't want to be part of this organization anymore. I think it's really important for school boards to have a voice nationally. I think if school boards start pulling out of the National School Board Association and gravitating towards more polarized associations that represent districts that just sort of think the way they do and don't represent the nation as a whole is not healthy for school boards and for school board associations. So I would not support any of those, and I'm open to other perspectives or conversation from my fellow board members.
Board Member Castro.
Thank you. Yeah, I do support us withdrawing support from 8, 9, and 10 the past year and a half or so. Debates at school board meetings, there's been a manifestation of what Board Member Carusi alluded to of partisan arguments debating mask or COVID mitigation strategies or vaccines or, hysteria over critical race theory. And, we have been blessed to have a community that has been very understanding and graceful, but other boards across the country have come under severe threat, and that is not okay. And so, I support withdrawing support from these 3 resolutions.
So I'm going to ask you, Board Member Castro or Board Member Carusi, to abstain in order for us to vote in that direction. I do similarly support the point of vote meeting, and I'm looking around the table, and I think there's a lot of support for that. I think Board Member Morelli, your hand was up.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to item 22.7. And this item, it's really critical, in particular during this, past couple of years and the heighten of hate crime towards Asian American and Pacific Islanders. What I was a bit confused is that there is Wisconsin legislation that already supports that it's on the line to comprehensive ethnic studies, which is not exactly the language that they were using here. But I wasn't sure why they didn't bring language from Act 31, just from Act 31 into this conversation. And I don't know if anyone from curriculum and instruction have looked at this and have any analysis on either to strengthen this resolution or to expand this resolution.
Board Member Morelli, I think you might be wanting to direct
Haley
Schmidt to further investigate what infects at the conference.
That sounds a great idea. It's okay.
Just because I'm like, I don't think our staff actually, they don't think.
Look at this. Okay. Thank you
They,
for.
they did.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're ready to respond immediately to that, but certainly can follow up with Carus.
Yeah, thank you so much. And since this is the first time that I'm noticing a very specific call out around curriculum and professional training, and we already have state statutes that are calling out for similar language for Black and Latinx communities. So, yes, I'm curious if how do we strengthen this and also expand to include Black and Latinx as also part of this the language of this resolution. Thank you so much. And we can talk offline.
Yeah, that would be great. So we're okay in supporting this and we want to know what else can be done to strengthen it. Yes. Okay, yeah, let's talk.
I think that we're getting into a space where we're directing Chris Gomez-Schmidt to do a lot of things that are not the motion. And I think that I guess I want to ask, do we want to vote on this motion, amend this motion, vote this motion down and direct Chris differently? And how do you proceed in doing that?
I think it's best to amend.
When is the ending? When is the
Amending.
meeting?
So you don't meet as a full board until after the convention. So it really shouldn't happen here. You can, amend the motion here as you see fit.
The motion right now is just saying that, like, direct her to vote. Doesn't say like yay or nay or anything like that. Just vote on items 1 through 10.
It says vote in support.
Vote in support, sorry.
So we'd have to call it anything we don't want and support on us.
The three that you had mentioned, we call on Chris Kersey to vote nay on. And those three. Go ahead.
So, and the vote is representative of the board.
Yes.
In our total. So it's not Chris going and voting on based on her own opinion, but based on our collective.
Yep.
Agreement. Do you want to amend?
Actually, before I amend, I would like to get clarification on one more resolution. That is 2202, annual inflationary or greater increases in per pupil spend of resources. On the surface, this looks good, but Ross, I'm wondering if you could tell us how this would actually play out.
Certainly. So this resolution is speaking directly to the mechanisms by which current law allows the state to increase either revenue limits or per pupil categorical aid. In fact, it mentions in 3 different scenarios. The rationale list number 1 is increasing by increasing per pupil revenue limits. 2, by providing an increase in per pupil categorical aid, which is outside revenue limits, or 3, a combination of either one. The only context I would want to highlight here is those 3 scenarios are not equal. And given our current situations of declining enrollment and non-recurring exemptions, addition to the per pupil categorical aid is actually more harmful to our long-term base revenue situation under the revenue limit than actually putting money on the per pupil revenue limit increase itself. So if we were to look at amending this language, my only suggestion would be to favor the first option over the other 2, because it would allow us to preserve our base revenue under the revenue limit for longer term.
Thank you, Russ.
So Ross, just to clarify that, is this a big enough change, or Chris, that I would need to add to our amendment that you would you recommend that Chris vote yes for this if an amendment doesn't go through? Or would you recommend a no vote on it if it's not changed?
I'm sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Oh, yes. No, I would certainly vote if an amendment were not agreed upon, I would still recommend voting for it, as any increase to our inflationary costs would be appreciated. I just wanted to highlight that these 3 situations are not equal.
Got it. Okay, in that case, I'm ready to amend. So my amendment is I move that the Board of Education direct Board Representative Chris Gomez-Schmidt to vote in support of the WASB 2022 resolutions, items 2201 to 2207, and against 2208 to 2210 at the January 22 State Education Convention Delegate Assembly meeting.
Second, Ali Muldrow. Any further discussion? Mama, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. We have no old business or new business, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, I'm sorry, Nama, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you all so much. Have a nice night and happy 2022. We'll see you next year.
Thank you.
Thanks.